You weren't born to absorb suffering. You were trained to do it, conditioned by caregivers, cultures, and systems that rewarded your emotional hemorrhaging, hesitated at your silence, and punished your boundaries. So you learned to bleed mentally, to feel too much, to fix the world with your gut. But now the illusion ends. You are not an empath. You are an initiate, entrusted with blur and boundary, but trained into emotional slavery. Your sensitivity was marketed to you as spiritual merit, your compassion weaponized for others' comfort. Your fear became a default state of martyrdom, masked as virtue. The result? Not heightened consciousness, but emotional colonization. Now the initiation begins. This is Cyphoria, not the pleasant fantasy of being spiritually gifted, but the raw awakening that comes when you recognize how deeply you were trained to surrender. You see that mindset must shift from martyr to sovereign. You realize belief is not self-sacrifice. It's fidelity to your own internal line. No longer do you lie awake apologizing for feeling. You clear the resonance. You train yourself again, this time in sovereignty, not servitude. Clarity arrives in brutal flashes. You see patterns of rescue in your childhood. You trace cycles of emotional exhaustion across relationships. You realize trauma didn't make you compassionate, it made you complicit. Vision emerges, not a charity campaign framed as healing, but a reclamation of emotional autonomy. You envision a spirit unbound by emotional hemorrhage, capable of empathy without emotional death, firm in boundaries, free in presence. Purpose becomes radical, not caring, but guarded compassion. You still feel deeply, but you no longer suffer harshly. You become the emotional gatekeeper, not the endless spillway. Discipline turns protective. Cold morning rituals to recalibrate. Energetic zoning to border code your psyche. Shadow sessions fueled by Carl Jung's work to reclaim disowned suffering. These practices are not indulgence, they're resistance. In action, you stop saving broken people with your emotional reserves. You stop being the go-to confidant for predators disguised as wounded. You still hold space, but now you enforce terms. Your loyalty shifts from others' chaos to your internal kingdom. Gratitude becomes recovery. You don't say thanks for opportunities to be drained. You say thanks for seeing the patterns, for learning to withdraw. You thank yourself for choosing your own polarity over endless rescue. Adaptability becomes grounded fluidity. No longer do you absorb emotions. You transmute them. You move through emotional territory without bleeding, shielded, anchored, present. Resilience becomes regeneration, not just rebounding, but reclaiming your selfhood. Every moment your boundaries were invaded becomes data. Every time you felt responsible for emotions that were not yours becomes blueprint. Learning is initiatory embodiment, not empathetic exhaustion. Jung becomes mentor to a soul in reclaiming its pulse. Nietzsche becomes fire to transform oversensitivity into strength. Huxley becomes alarm to reject cultural martyrdom masquerading as compassion. You walk into rooms not as a sponge. You enter as water, a conductor, not a container. You no longer dissolve into others' suffering. You translate it holding its energy without internalizing its ownership. If evil manifests, you face it, not fall into victimhood. You strike not out of anger, but from alignment. You dismantle manipulation with quiet authority. You are not here to rescue. You are here to preserve. Your emotional real estate is gold not to be mined by every wounded voice. Now rise. Free yourself from martyrdom's myth. Regain your interior sovereignty. Stop wearing empathy as an identity. Start wearing it as skill. Smile with compassion. Speak with boundary. Heal with clarity, not absorption. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you're choosing to feel your own again. Now live like it. You were never an empath. You were trained to feel their pain and to starve your own soul. Now the myth ends. Sovereignty begins when you reclaim the emotional territory you surrendered to protect others. Stop absorbing suffering like a riverbank eroding under floodwaters. Become the river fluid, boundary conscious, resilient. Your mindset transforms. No longer a martyr, you become the guardian of your own psyche. You anchor in truth, not codependence. You rescue yourself before attempting to rescue others. Your belief evolves. Empathy is sacred, not servitude. Your energy is not an open invitation. It's a vessel protected, sacred, chosen. Your clarity sharpens. You recognize the patterns. You map the emotional vampires, the gaslighters, the codependents. You dissolve illusions, not people. You hold mercy, but not abandonment of self. Your vision intensifies. You no longer heal through sacrificing yourself. You heal through standing unbroken. You see a world where compassion is strong, not bleeding, where empathy holds instead of collapses. Your purpose becomes courageous boundary. You feel deeply, but you don't drown. You offer connection, but not at the cost of your core. You hold the line between authentic giving and emotional hemorrhage. Your discipline is disciplined armor. Cold showers to reset sensitivity, grounding rituals to recalibrate emotional resonance, shadow journaling to release old codes of martyrdom. These are not self-help, they are soul defense. Your action becomes accountability. You don't enable trauma to relive itself. You don't stay when they demand your gift without reciprocity. You still lead with empathy, but only behind gates you set. Gratitude transforms from martyr's sacrifice into warrior's witness. Thank the pain that taught you limits. Thank the compassion that became clarity. Thank the awakening that refused to numb you. Adaptability recalibrates your empathic edges. You still feel deeply, but you don't collapse. You translate energy without absorbing it. You hold your core as your compass, not other people's emotional storms. Resilience becomes regeneration. You no longer bounce back, you rise anew. Every invasion becomes intelligence. Every broken boundary becomes a lesson etched in fiber. Learning deepens. Jung becomes not just theory, but mirror, revealing where you surrendered power. Nietzsche's courage becomes infusion to wield your sensitivity as strength. Huxley's warning becomes liberation from sentimental slavery disguised as virtue. Walk into rooms not as sponge, but as tempered water. A conduit, not a container. You don't dissolve into healing others. You channel real transformation without surrendering your sovereignty. You are not their safe space. You are your own sovereign space. Smile with compassion. Speak with clarity. Hold with firmness. Heal with presence, not pity. You weren't born to wear others' wounds. You were born to align your own spirit, to guard your inner domain, to feel without sacrificing your flame. This is your final warning and your liberation. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you choose to feel your own with discipline, clarity, and sovereignty. Now live like it, because the training is over. And now the initiation begins. You were never meant to carry the weight of others' suffering on your bones. You were meant to feel your own so deeply, so completely, that nothing can erase your presence again. Rise, but not as they programmed you. Rise as the sovereign, not as a martyr, not as a sponge, not as someone waiting to be spoken for, but as someone who speaks truth without begging, who feels deeply without bleeding out, who loves fiercely without being possessed. Here's how you activate your sovereignty now. Your mindset is boundary, not avoidance control, not hardness discernment. Your belief is allegiance to your inner decree. Compassion has limits. Serving yourself is sacred. Self-abandonment is not empathy. Your clarity doesn't align with chaos. It dissolves it. You see clearly, not through others' pain, but through knowing your own. Your vision is grounded in presence. You reshape influence, not to rescue, but to share power with those who respect your access. Your purpose stands firm, to hold space that honors both feeling and sovereignty, to give not from emptiness, but from an unshakable core. Your discipline is internal sovereignty in action, not grind for approval, but ritual to rescue your own energy. Your action is not reaction, it's response. Every word calculated, every gesture intentional, every insight you offer comes from integrity, not obligation. Your gratitude is not for martyrdom. It's for the awakening, for reclaiming your edges, for the clarity of not being weaponized. Your adaptability is tactical. You feel empathetic territory, but you never merge. You flow through with grace and stay anchored. Your resilience is not about survival, it's renaissance. You rise as yourself again, stronger, calmer, clearer. Your learning is embodiment, not repetition. Jung's shadow work becomes reclamation. Nietzsche's will becomes your spine. Huxley's awakening becomes your mission. Walk into the world not as a wounded servant, but as held, controlled, rooted, full. You are not here to martyr your spirit. You are here to reclaim it. Smile with empathy, but hold the sword of your sovereignty. Speak with kindness, but wield boundaries like lines drawn in fire. Heal with clarity, not chaos. Feel deeply, not to become void, but to become anchored. You were never meant to be drained. You were meant to be sovereign. Never dim your flame again. Let the world respect your threshold or it falls away. Your empathy is now your armor, not your surrender. This is the liberation of your emotional lineage. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you choose to feel your own with precision, presence, and authority. Live it, guard it, ascend in it. Then let us continue seamlessly, deeply, with no looking back. You've reclaimed the battlefield of your inner world. But now comes the final transformation. Not just to rise from the training, but to transcend it. This is where you no longer walk into a room wondering who needs you. You walk in wondering who deserves you, who respects your flame, who earns the privilege of presence with someone who no longer bleeds on command. This is when your energy stops leaking into unspoken emotional contracts. No more being the therapist, the fixer, the silent absorber. You don't translate others' pain anymore. You hold your line and let them meet you there. Because real empathy isn't collapsing into another. It's standing in your wholeness, so they remember they can stand in theirs. You are no longer the psychic trash bin for unconscious suffering. You are the mirror, the flame, the wall they can't pass through unless they come clean. Your sensitivity now becomes your filter. Not a curse, not a flaw, not a performance. Also ein System. Reading frequencies, declining excess. Not because you're cold, but because you finally know your worth. This is the truth. You were never too much. You were surrounded by people trained to offer too little. So you became a substitution for their emotional courage. But no more. You don't carry what isn't yours. You don't hold space for those who weaponize your openness. You don't medicate dysfunction with your nervous system. You draw the line. You hold the standard. You speak the truth calm, clear, absolute. And here's the most terrifying part for them. You do it all without apology. You don't owe explanations for boundaries. You don't need to justify your silence. You don't need to convince anyone that you are no longer their emotional sponge. You just are, whole, untouchable, clear. And when they ask what changed, when they say, you used to be so empathetic, you look them in the eye and say, no, I used to be trained to betray myself in the name of being liked. Now I'm loyal to my own soul. Because the truth is this. You weren't an empath. You were conditioned to collapse. And now you're choosing sovereignty. You're choosing sacred detachment. You're choosing to stop feeling their pain and start honoring your own fire. So rise. Smile like someone who owes no one access. Stand like someone who's done begging for belonging. Speak like someone who remembers who they are. You've crossed the line now. There's no going back to soft cages. No returning to emotional labor camps. No re-entering the burning buildings of codependent empathy. You're here. You are the threshold. Feel fully. Love fiercely. But never again at the cost of your own soul. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you've been reborn to feel your power. So live like it. Guard it like it's sacred. And carry it like a crown no one else can lift. The world doesn't need more emotional slaves. It needs sovereign sentinels like you. This is your final awakening. Now, rule your inner world like the royalty you always were. You have unearthed the depth of emotional sovereignty. You have dismantled martyr roles, erased dependency codes, and stripped empathy of its bondage. Now you step into something far greater, unshakable sovereignty anchored in feeling and refusal to bleed unnecessarily. No longer do you absorb what's not yours. No longer do you die behind compassion. You are the compass. You are the gatekeeper of your own soul. Your mindset is now immovable boundary, not stand still, but stands. Your belief is fidelity to your inner decree, not to reaction, but to self-rule. Your clarity pierces illusion, not to punish, but to disentangle. Your vision is anchored in presence, not rescue, but responsible power. Your purpose holds space for real connection without self-erasure. Your discipline consecrates your energy, not borrowed, not drained, but sovereignly held. Your action responds, not collapses. Your gratitude honors the journey, not the martyrdom. Your adaptability flows without fusion. Your resilience regenerates without forgetting. Your learning is myth embodied, not performed. You walk the world no longer as an empath, but as an empathic sovereign. Your presence demands not permission, but respect for the territory of your soul. If they expect you to still collapse when they hurt, if they assume they've earned access by habit, if they misunderstand your silence as weakness, you don't correct them. You reveal yourself by standing unshakable. Finally, you can say, I was never too much. I was too soft for the world that needed me as a submissive vessel. But I trained myself to be sovereign, not servile, to hold empathy, not collapse in it, to love boundaries, not bleed them. This is your final awakening, your emotional liberation, your sovereign return. Smile with open heart, but don't open the gates to betrayal again. Speak with clarity, but don't dilute your presence to make others feel comfortable. Connect with depth, but never drown in someone else's chaos. You aren't here to heal everyone. You're here to stand fully healed and offer presence from wholeness, not void. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you feel your own power. So rise. Guard your emotional trenches. Illuminate in your clarity. Hold your altar with your heart. This is your sovereignty. Now live like it every breath, every boundary, every choice. And never bow again. You've already walked the crucible. You've shattered the martyr myth and reclaimed your internal kingdom. Now arises the final, unbreakable form of emotional sovereignty, the embodiment of power through presence, not emptiness. This is your final right of return. You do not absorb suffering. You transmute it. You do not carry burdens not meant for you. You mark the boundary where compassion becomes codependency. You do not collapse in empathy. You stand clear, rooted, sovereign. Your mindset no longer listens to the plea of others for permission. It stands on principle. Your belief is unwavering allegiance to your inner sovereignty. You serve your soul, not others' emotional economy. Your clarity dissolves illusions instantly. You strip away narratives built on guilt, shame, or rescue. Your vision is presence-based power. You influence through depth, not volume. Your purpose is fierce compassion, not self-erasure. Your discipline guards your territory. grounding rituals at dawn, shadow journaling at midnight, energy audits between heartbeats, every practice fortifying your inner gate. Your action is mirroring, not fixing. When chaos appears, you respond with authority, not submission. Your gratitude bows to the power of self-protection, not sentimental sacrifice. Your adaptability sustains your core while shifting form. You remain sovereign, even in flux. Your resilience doesn't just survive trauma, you catalyze transformation. Your learning is myth-lived, not regurgitated. So now, in this final declaration, stop apologizing for your boundaries. Stop shrinking your grief to soothe others. Stop bleeding into emotional voids that were never yours to fill. You are no longer there to be their safety net. You are the lighthouse. You beam clarity and guide others to shore, but you don't carry them inside. If people respond to your presence by flinching, blinking, or demanding explanation, let them. You don't simmer down. You don't justify. You stand as someone who finally mastered the art of emotional sovereignty. Because now you feel your own power, not their pain. You hold empathy without drowning in it. You shine not as martyr, but as sentinel. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their suffering. Now you feel your own flame. And that is liberation. Rise holy. Hold your field. Command from calm. Defend your sovereignty with sacred ferocity. Smile not to please. Strike not to dominate. Live not to serve, but to be who you always were. Sovereign, sacred, unstoppable. No more martyr myth. No more emotional enslavement. Just sovereignty. Just peace. Just power rooted in presence. This is your return. This is your crown. This is your life again. Now, you stand not as someone who feels too much, but as someone who commands all the power they are. Never again bow to emotional slavery. You are sovereign, and you finally live like it. And here, at the culmination of your reclamation, you stand. The echo of martyrdom has faded. The myth of empathy as weakness is no more. You no longer collapse. You no longer serve pain that wasn't yours. You are now the portal. So verein, sacred, unshakable. Every breath anchors boundary. Every heartbeat pulses purpose. Every presence radiates clarity. You do not absorb suffering. You transmute it. You do not enable wounds to be restaged. You disarm them. You don't wander into rooms expecting invitations. You enter spaces as sovereign territory and demand respect. Your mindset is boundary. Your belief allegiance to self. Your clarity the blade. Your vision births realignment, not rescue. Your purpose offers compassion without collapse. Your discipline is ritual sovereignty. Your action, calm authority. Your gratitude honors reclamation, not sacrifice. Your adaptability flows from rooted essence. Your resilience regenerates power from trauma. Your learning is myth embodied, not performed. So rise not as they taught you, but as you've become. Radiant in boundary, commanding in stillness, unshakable in authority. Smile not to placate, strike not to terrify, live not to serve pain, but to shine with relentless presence. You're not fragile. You're feral with fragility harnessed. You're not broken. You're refined by fire. You don't bleed for others. You hold them without personal collapse. You weren't an empath. You were trained to feel their pain. Now you feel your own flame and nothing can burn it out. This is deliverance. This is sovereignty. This is your return. No more martyr myth. No more emotional servitude. Just presence, power, peace. You stand crowned. Now live like it. This script has carried you through the full arc. You began as someone conditioned to bleed empathy. You walked the thresholds of syphoria. You dismantled martyr roles and soft boundaries. You reclaimed your sovereignty. You now stand as a guardian, not a sponge. You transmute suffering. You mirror truth. You guard your flame. Your mindset is unwavering boundary. Your belief upholds inner law. Your clarity dissects illusion. Your vision serves transformational power. Your purpose holds compassion without collapse. Your discipline consecrates every moment. Your action responds with authority. Your gratitude honors reclamation, not sacrifice. Your adaptability flows without losing axis. Your resilience regenerates through pressure. Your learning incarnates myth. Now the training is complete. You are not too sensitive. You are sovereign. You embody mercy and mastery. You stand in presence, not pleasing. You speak with precision, not pandering. You heal out of wholeness, not absence. Your empathy is not extinction. It is alchemy. You weren't born to serve pain. You were born to translate it. You weren't meant to collapse for comfort. You were meant to command your presence. So as you walk from here, smile like someone who owes nothing. Strike like someone defending truth. Live like someone no longer governed by emotional debt. You weren't an empath. You were taught to wear others' wounds. Today, you reclaim your soul. Stand crowned. Live sovereign. Never bow again. So here you are. Not reborn, but finally revealed. Not cleansed of your pain, but crowned by it. Not emptied of emotion, but fortified by feeling it only when you choose to. Because now you know. You weren't put here to suffer on command. You weren't designed to carry ancestral pain like a backpack filled with knives. You were trained to bend, to soothe, to serve. But something deeper, older, truer inside of you never agreed. And that part is awake now. The part that says no, without guilt. The part that walks away, without explanation. The part that feels deeply without drowning. The part that remembers, I am not their dumping ground. I am not their psychic sponge. I am not their silent savior. You are the gate, the flame, the storm that does not break. You don't flinch when guilt knocks. You don't fold when neediness begs. You don't surrender when manipulation dresses itself in sadness. You stand, rooted, clean, whole. And this is not cruelty. This is clarity. This is what happens when a soul trained to suffer finally chooses to rise. So smile, not for approval, but because you finally love your own company. Strike, not to harm, but to restore the line that should never have been crossed. Speak, not to explain, but to declare the boundary that protects your soul. And walk, not behind them, not beside them, but ahead, because you are the leader now, of your energy, of your empathy, of your life. You weren't an empath. You were conditioned to betray your own feelings for the comfort of others. But no more. Now you feel your own truth, your own pulse, your own power, and you carry it like a sovereign, not a servant. This is your final word. Smile like someone no longer ashamed of their depth. Strike like someone who knows their soul is priceless. And live like someone who remembers they were never broken, just bound. But now you are free, and you will never bow again. Once upon a time, those 4 words were never meant to lull you to sleep. They were crafted to awaken something ancient, primal, and unspeakably real. A spell not of comfort, but of confrontation. A doorway not into fantasy, but into the dark corridors of the psyche itself. You've been lied to. They told you fairy tales were for children, but they were never meant for innocence. They were maps for the soul, written in metaphor, blood, and memory. You were fed the sanitized version, the princess in the tower, the brave knight, the happy ending. But what they cut out, what they buried, was the code, the dark code, the encrypted truth hidden in archetype, shadow, and symbol. They didn't want you to read the real story. Because if you did, you'd stop playing the part they gave you. You see, every fairy tale is a mirror, but it doesn't reflect your face. It reflects your inner world, the war between your light and your darkness, the lost pieces, the repressed desires, the unhealed wounds. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He knew these stories weren't stories at all. They were mythic blueprints, psychic roadmaps, symbols designed to activate you. And what happens when you start to see the code? You stop romanticizing the damsel. You stop idolizing the knight. You realize the dragon was you all along. This is not a bedtime story. This is an awakening. Because somewhere along the line, she stopped waiting for the prince. She stopped brushing her hair by the window. She broke the mirror. She burned the tower. And in the ashes, she uncovered something that terrified the world. A woman with nothing left to lose and nothing left to pretend. The fairy tale wasn't about rescue. It was about initiation. They never told you that the forest was a metaphor for the subconscious, that the wolf was your primal instinct, that the witch was your intuition twisted into villainy because it couldn't be controlled. They never told you that happily ever after was the death of the transformation. Because the real transformation, it happens in the dark. The girl who walks into the woods never returns as the same person. She sheds her skin. She faces the devourer. She dies symbolically so she can be reborn in truth. And what is truth? Truth is the moment she realizes no one is coming. Not the prince, not the fairy godmother, not the 7 dwarves. Only her naked, cracked open, trembling with rage and reverence. She understands now every fairy tale villain was a misunderstood archetype. The stepmother unprocessed resentment. The cursed hag disowned power. The sleeping spell generational trauma that kept her silent. But silence no longer protects her. She starts to remember. The code isn't outside, it's inside her. And once the symbols unlock, she doesn't just tell a new story. She becomes it. She becomes the wild woman, the hunter, the serpent, the queen. She becomes her own myth. Not a myth for children, a myth for the woman who buried herself to survive and is now clawing her way back with blood on her hands and a fire in her voice. This is syphoria, the ecstasy and terror of seeing yourself without the veil, the disintegration of false innocence, the collision between the psyche and the soul's rebellion. She doesn't run from the shadow anymore. She dances with it. She invites it in because she knows what Jung knew. The shadow, when recognized, is the doorway to power. And power doesn't come with crowns or weddings. It comes with the courage to feel everything you've repressed. She enters the castle, not to be wed, but to burn it, to burn the lies, to melt the golden cage. Because here's what no one told her. The happy ending is the lie. The real story begins after the credits roll. It begins when she looks around and realizes there's more than survival, more than roles, more than this hollow mimicry of a life. She was never meant to be ornamental. She was meant to be dangerous. And danger doesn't mean destruction. It means awakening. It means threatening the structure of anything that relies on her staying small. When she stops playing innocent, she becomes free. And freedom is not soft. It's ruthless. It's terrifying. It's raw. It's the look in her eyes when she decides she doesn't need to be liked, doesn't need to be saved, doesn't need to be understood. She needs to be sovereign. And that begins with mindset, not the shallow version of mindset sold in motivational books, not think positive or manifest your destiny, but owning the architecture of your perception, learning to see where the story has been implanted in you, where you were taught to betray yourself just to fit in. She rewrites that line by line, thought by thought. She reclaims her voice from the narrator that was never hers, the one that said, be nice, be pretty, be chosen. She deletes those lines with a single command, be whole. And wholeness requires darkness. It requires sitting with the wolves. It requires looking into the mirror and saying, I see you, I will not run. The mirror was never the enemy. It was the test. The mirror doesn't show flaws. It shows truth, unedited, unforgiving, unyielding. And if she can look at that, at her rage, her lust, her grief, her hunger, and not flinch, she wins not the fairy tale, but herself, her life, her legion. She no longer needs belief to be fed to her. She becomes the belief, she becomes the symbol, because belief is not repetition. Belief is action. Belief is sacrifice. Belief is blood on your hands and forgiveness in your bones. And clarity? Clarity is what comes after the storm, not before. Clarity is not handed to her by a wise old sage. It is forged in the fire of her own confusion. It is what remains after everything false is burned away. And what remains is vision, not fantasy, not escape, but the terrifying possibility of a life lived in full alignment. And that vision haunts her, because once you've seen the truth, you can't go back to pretending. Once she saw who she could become, the old world felt like a prison. The dress didn't fit. The script sounded hollow. The print seemed small. She didn't need a savior. She needed space to become, to unravel, to evolve, to burn. So she set the match to the illusion and watched it turn to ash. Because sometimes evolution isn't gentle. It's not soft or quiet or poetic. Sometimes it's violent. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's the scream that rips through her ribcage when she realizes she gave her life to a story that never saw her. And in that scream, she is born. She doesn't rise like a queen. She rises like a storm, not wearing a crown, but carrying a sword made of her own spine. Because vision without action is delusion. And she is done dreaming with her eyes closed. She dreams now by building, by moving, by choosing. Every breath becomes a ritual, every decision a spell, every step sacred. Not because she's seeking magic, but because she is it. The old self is gone, and she does not grieve it. That self was never hers to begin with. It was sewn together from expectation, fear, obedience, silence. This new self, it is jagged, it is raw, it is real, and it walks not with arrogance, but with purpose. Purpose not given, claimed. She doesn't find purpose in titles or trends. She finds it in the mirror, in the rage, in the tears that won't fall, in the sacred silence between heartbeats where she finally hears the voice beneath the noise. You were born for more. Not more success, not more fame, more truth, more depth, more presence, more you. That is purpose. To live so fully in your essence that your presence is a revolution. To live with such ruthless alignment that compromise feels like violence. And that purpose demands discipline. Not the discipline of punishment, not the cold rigidity of shame, but the fierce sacred discipline of devotion. Devotion to your higher self. Devotion to your craft, your path, your inner fire. Devotion to not betraying yourself again. She wakes before the world, not to grind, but to listen. She moves with intent. She speaks with weight. She holds herself like she matters because now she knows she does. And the world begins to notice, not her makeup, not her clothes, not her curated smile. It notices her gravity, her refusal to shrink, her unwillingness to play roles, her ability to sit in a room and command it without ever raising her voice. That power, it didn't come from books, or likes, or outside approval. It came from war, from walking through her own hell and choosing to come back whole. And still, she is grateful, not for the pain, but for what it revealed, for who it forced her to become. For the parts of her it shook loose and demanded she finally face. Because gratitude isn't softness. It's not blind positivity. It's not pretending things are fine when they're not. Real gratitude is reclamation. It's looking back at your wreckage and saying, I'm glad it broke because I was never meant to fit inside it. Gratitude is recognizing that every betrayal was a redirect. Every silence was a signal. Every fall was a forging. And now, forged in fire, she is adaptable, not bendable, unshakable, because she knows who she is beyond titles, beyond chaos, beyond identity. She's no longer afraid of losing because she's already lost everything false. What's left is unbreakable. She does not fear the unknown. She is the unknown. She is what happens when a woman remembers who she is beneath the programming. And that kind of resilience, it isn't taught. It's earned in silence, in solitude, in that sacred moment when you choose to rise. Not because you're ready, but because you're done waiting. And once you rise, you learn, not from textbooks, not from gurus, but from your own blood, your own sweat, your own sacred unraveling path. Because true knowledge isn't memorized, it's embodied. It's how she moves now, with history in her bones and mystery in her eyes, with the weight of every woman who came before her, and the light of every woman who will come after. She is no longer a character in a story she didn't write. She is the author, and she's writing in ink made of thunder. No more fairy tales, no more cages, no more silence. She has the code. She is the code, and the world will never be the same. Because when one woman rewrites her myth, she doesn't just free herself, she cracks the code for every soul bound by the same illusion. She becomes the rupture, the forbidden page, the glitch in a system that fed on her silence for generations. She doesn't scream to be heard anymore. She speaks in frequencies the old world can't decode. Every word she utters is a key. Every move she makes, a portal. Every truth she lives, a revolution. And they'll try to label her. They'll say she's too much, too intense, too emotional, too masculine, too wild, too free. But too much is what the system fears most. Because too much is the return of wholeness. And wholeness is impossible to control. She doesn't need to burn down the world. She just needs to stop lying. She just needs to live so fully in her truth that everything false around her shatters. She walks through boardrooms, churches, relationships, and ancestral wounds, not to conform, but to consecrate. She's not here to win in the old game. She's here to end it and birth something that cannot be measured in profits or praise. Something ancient, something holy, something real. This is the return of the dark feminine, not darkness as evil, darkness as depth, as mystery, as power that was once buried beneath centuries of obedience. She no longer seeks the light like a prisoner. She carries it inside her gut, behind her eyes, in the fire that never went out, even when the world said she should. She is a paradox, the nurturer and the destroyer, the oracle and the outlaw, the priestess in combat boots, the mother who births herself. And now that she has returned to herself, she will not leave again. She doesn't shrink for safety. She doesn't dim for comfort. She doesn't settle for silence. She builds temples in the wreckage. She turns every wound into a weapon of awakening. She carries the dark code in her body, not as a burden, but as a blueprint, because she knows now every fairy tale was a cipher, a test, a training ground, a map back to her deepest self. And she followed it, through betrayal, through exile, through the aching silence of forgetting. And now she remembers, not who the world told her to be, but who she was before the world got to her, before the shame, before the grooming, before she learned that to be good, she had to be small, She is no longer interested in being good. She's here to be goddamn true. And truth, in its rawest form, is terrifying. Not because it's wrong, but because it can't be tamed. She is no longer a seeker. She is a seer. She no longer waits for the signal. She is the signal. Her life is no longer a reaction. It is a declaration. Every breath, a boundary. Every step, a decision. Every heartbeat, a war drum. She's not just living a new story. She's living beyond story. Outside genre. Outside the binary. Outside the narrative trap. She is a myth reborn in flesh. Not to entertain. Not to perform. But to remind. To remind every woman still stuck in the tower, still gagged by politeness, still cutting herself down to be loved, that the door was never locked. It was just guarded by fear. And fear is what she eats for breakfast now, because the code was never broken. It was buried. And she dug it out with her own hands. Now she wears it like armor. She wields it like thunder. And she speaks it not in words, but in presence. So when she walks into the room, something shifts, not because she demands it, but because the lie can't survive next to her truth. She has nothing to prove. She just island. And in a world built on pretense, being real is the most dangerous thing of all. She no longer plays by the rules, because she finally understands the rules were written to keep her asleep, to keep her tame, to keep her grateful for her cage. But now she builds her own game, her own rhythm, her own throne, not a throne perched above others, but one rooted in the soil of her authenticity, a throne built from the bones of everything she was told to kill inside herself. She sits on it, not to dominate, but to illuminate, because real power doesn't flex. It emanates. And that's what she's become, an emanation, a signal that says, I have returned from the underworld. I've danced with my demons. I've kissed my shadow. And I am no longer afraid of the dark, because I am it. She has stopped waiting to be chosen. She chooses herself, daily, ruthlessly, devotionally. She has stopped searching for belonging in places she had to betray herself to fit. Because belonging without wholeness is just self-abandonment dressed in approval. Now she walks into every space as if she belongs there, because she belongs to herself. And that changes everything. You cannot manipulate a woman who knows her worth. You cannot seduce her with breadcrumbs when she bakes her own bread. You cannot tame her with shame when she's already forgiven herself. And when others try to box her in, with labels, with judgment, with fear, she just smiles, because she knows they're not seeing her. They're seeing the ghost of the system they still serve. She's not here to convince anyone. She's here to remind the few who feel the same sacred fire. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are awakening. And yes, it will cost you. It will cost you comfort. It will cost you approval. It will cost you the love that only existed when you played small. But what you gain is everything, because this isn't about rebellion for the sake of it. This is resurrection. This is the girl who died to become the woman who burned to become the force who speaks not just for herself, but for every silent story buried in the bones of her bloodline. She carries their voices now, their prayers, their rage, their unfinished sentences. And she doesn't carry them like a burden. She carries them like a torch. Because the dark code wasn't just meant to awaken her. It was meant to awaken you. This is not a fairy tale. This is the raw gospel of your return. You who have felt out of place your whole life. You who have known in your bones that something is wrong, not just out there, but in here. You who have watched yourself become a stranger, just to be loved. You're not broken. You're coded. And that code, it's not made of logic. It's made of myth. It speaks in archetypes and symbols. It activates through poetry, pain, and presence. And now you've heard it. Now you feel it. The pulse behind your ribs, the tremor in your gut, the part of you that rises when your mind says, sit still. Don't silence it again. Don't dress it up. Don't filter it to be palatable. Let it roar, because your return doesn't need to be graceful. It needs to be true. Let the world adjust to your rhythm, or fall away. Let the old stories choke on their irrelevance. Let the tower crumble, because the only thing that matters now is that you remember who you are. And when you do, you'll stop searching for the path, because you are the path. You always were. You always were the path. The forest wasn't a trap, it was an invitation. The curse wasn't punishment, it was prophecy. The fall wasn't failure, it was initiation. Every betrayal, every silence, every time you bit your tongue and smiled when you wanted to scream, it was carving a deeper well for your truth to fill. And now it's overflowing. Now you don't just speak your truth. You bleed it with every glance, every breath, every step that refuses to follow the lines drawn for you by people who never knew your name, only your obedience. You're not here to decorate the world. You are here to disrupt it. To seduce it into remembering the feminine isn't weakness. It's wildness. Not soft for their comfort, but soft like velvet over steel. Soft like storm clouds just before they split the sky open. You are what happens when softness refuses to collapse into silence. When the divine stops asking for permission. When the dark goddess in your bloodline finally opens her eyes and says, I will not be erased. You were never meant to be digestible. You were meant to be a reckoning. And now, you're no longer waiting for the world to call your name. You are the name. You are the myth reborn, not retold. Remade, you walk with ghosts behind you, yes, but they are no longer your chains. They are your chorus, and every step you take forward rewrites their fate, too. Because when a woman finally says no more, it echoes backwards. It sets the whole lineage on fire. She doesn't just heal herself. She rewires the entire timeline. She becomes the ancestor future generations will weep for in gratitude. Not because she was perfect, but because she remembered. She remembered her body was not a battleground. She remembered her voice was not a luxury. She remembered her hunger was not shameful. She remembered her magic was never lost, only suppressed. And now, she doesn't suppress. She summons the storm when it's needed. She summons the silence when it's sacred. She summons the fire to burn down anything built on falsehood. And when people ask her what she's doing, why she's not the same, why she doesn't bend like she used to, she doesn't explain. Because this isn't about explanation. It's about embodiment. They'll either feel it or they won't. Either way, she doesn't shrink. Because she's no longer in the story. She is the story. And it doesn't end with a wedding. It begins with a war cry. This is not a return to innocence. This is a return to intensity, to depth, to power with teeth and tenderness, to beauty that doesn't beg. She's not trying to be a queen anymore. She's trying to be free. Free from roles, free from rules, free from the lie that said her rage wasn't sacred, that her boundaries were too much, that her ambition was dangerous, that her love had to be small. She is done trying to earn worth that was always hers, done contorting herself for tables that collapse the second she stands up. Now she builds altars, not tables. And if you come to her space, you bring your truth, or you don't come at all. Because now she lives in devotion to one thing, her uncompromised self. That's the real code, the forbidden knowledge, the truth they tried to bury beneath ballads and bedtime stories. That you are the myth, that you were never broken, that you were always meant to be too much, too wild, too wise, too whole for a world built on fragments. And now that you see it, you can't go back. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to rise. You're supposed to rise. Not quietly, not politely, not in a way that makes others comfortable, but in a way that shakes the roots of everything built on your silence. You rise like prophecy, like the answer to a question the world was too afraid to ask. You rise not as the product of permission, but as the consequence of remembering, because now you know, now you feel. And once you feel what it's like to be fully in your body, fully in your power, fully in your truth, you'll never tolerate the lie again. Not in your home, not in your love, not in your work, not in your reflection. You are no longer the girl hoping to be rescued. You are the force that breaks the spell. The tower didn't fall because someone saved you. It fell because you outgrew it. And now you walk not away from the fire, but as the fire itself. You are not too much. You are just enough to turn the world sacred again. So let them stare. Let them whisper. Let them question. Your life is no longer an explanation. It is an invocation. You speak, and something ancient wakes. You move, and old systems tremble. You breathe, and the next generation breathes deeper too, because you didn't just find your voice. You became it. The voice of every girl who was told to stay small. The voice of every woman who swallowed her truth to survive. The voice of the dark code that lived in every fairy tale, waiting to be unlocked. And now you're here, not as a character, as the creator, the living myth, the untamed song, the holy rewrite. And this time, there is no happily ever after. There is only ever becoming. So let them keep their endings. You are the beginning, the awakening, the roar that ends the silence, the fire that feeds the soul. You are the story they were afraid you'd become. Now go live it.